like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded and unsurrendered of the Wolastoqey, Mi'kmaq, Pescotobemukati territory we currently stand on, and we wish to thank them for allowing us to be together today. To recognize the land is an expression of our gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we are on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us to reside on the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past historical tense. Colonialism is a current ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. We also acknowledge that colonialism, racism, and heteronormativity continue to shape this region and our society. In this spirit, we honor the enduring presence, knowledge, and leadership of Two-Spirit people whose sacred roles have existed in indigenous communities since time immemorial, and who continue to be leaders in the work of decolonization and healing. We also recognize the lives, contributions, and struggles of the 2S LGBTQIA+ peoples who continue to face systemic marginalizations and violence, including within anti-racism and identities are respected, including within anti-racism and reconciliation efforts. Inclusion is not just about presence, it is about creating space where all identities are respected, affirmed, and centered. We are all treaty people. As such, we each have a role to play in advancing justice, truth, and meaningful reconciliation, including confronting the systems of oppression that affect indigenous, racialized, queer, trans, and Two-Spirit communities alike. We have Larry Finkelman.
Before I begin, I just wanted to thank the MCAF for organizing this panel this evening and for over the past several years. This is especially timely. Our society, I believe, is becoming increasingly polarized, and all of us need to learn to have discussions where diversity is welcomed, tolerance for different opinions is encouraged, and respect for different points of view is valued. These are sometimes uncomfortable conversations to have, but I think they're valuable in bringing us not necessarily to agreement, but toward working toward greater understanding. And I wanted to really thank the MCAF for helping to move us all toward that kind of understanding. I got it. Okay. Just had to turn it on. Some of you will recognize this slide as the hospital here in Fredericton, even without the sign, the Dr. Edward Chalmers Hospital. And about a year ago, I was admitted for emergency surgery. And as I was recovering, I was in a room with 3 other men, and there were partitions separating me from the other people, and other people from me. And some of the background that was going on in the room were machines, dispensing IVs. There were conversations, there were healthcare talks, all this kind of going on in the background. But you couldn't help but to overhear bits and pieces of the conversations. So one evening I was laying in bed, and the man next to me was talking. He was trying to keep his business going. He was talking on the phone. I think he sounded like he was negotiating some kind of a deal. And then he raised his voice and said, "I'm not a greedy Jew." This floored me. You expect a hospital to be a safe place. And I, without even thinking, I yelled at him. I said, "Hey, you can't say that here. I'm Jewish." And I gave him a short explanation of the origin of that term and why it was offensive. Unfortunately, this is not an isolated incident. A middle school teacher mentioned to me that she overheard 2 students on the schoolyard One was trying to borrow money from the other didn't want to lend it, and the first student said, "Don't be a Jew with your money." It's not uncommon in Canada to have coins thrown at middle and high school Jewish students and to say, "Go pick it up, you money-grubbing Jew." Now, all these comments stem from an anti-Semitic myth of Jews being stingy or greedy or worshiping money. This originated in the year 400 when the church outlawed occupations related to money and money lending for Christians. So Jews, who were already barred from all these other occupations, they couldn't go into the military, the trades, the crafts, they couldn't own land, so they couldn't go into agriculture. So Jews were funneled into these jobs. And because those occupations were branded as evil by the church, Jews were tagged with that label. Now, when you do something for over 1,000 years, you get pretty good at it. So when the modern banking system opened up, Jews went into those occupations. But this gave rise to the myth of Jews owning all the banks and controlling the world's finances. Now, this is a story where we were pushed to the margins of society, succeeded at something that no one else wanted to do, and then were despised for it. Now, the man in the hospital, or the kids on the schoolyard, or even the teacher, wouldn't have known the history behind their remarks. My guess is the man in the bed next to me, or the kids on the schoolyard, probably never even met a Jew or talked to one in any serious way. Part of that is because Jews in Canada make up only 1% of the population. In a country of 41 to 42 million, we're barely 400,000. So most Canadians would not ever known somebody is Jewish or interacted with them. But they would have absorbed the anti-Semitic myth of the Jewish connection to money because it's embedded in our culture. It's woven into our fabric of our culture. Some of you may recognize this. This was a character from a play by Shakespeare, Shylock. He was a character, a stereotype of a greedy Jew. Now, Shakespeare could not have based his character on any living Jew that he knew, because Jews were exiled from England in 1290, and they weren't readmitted until close to Shakespeare's death. So he based this on what he had gathered from the concept of Jews in the culture. So without ever talking to a Jew, he would have known about Jews from the culture. And this is not the only myth that the Jews have to contend with. I made a list here just off the top of my head. Jews have been accused of killing Jesus, of being ritual murderers, taking Christian children, taking their blood, using it for ritual purposes, stealing the organs of Palestinian children and selling them, being child killers, being greedy, controlling the banks, the media, the Hollywood, being responsible for the plague, for COVID, for causing wars, military defeats, economic depressions, being responsible for immigration, for the African slave trade, being Nazis, originating communism, originating capitalism, and being colonists, settlers, occupiers, and racists. Now, all these myths have something in common. They equate everything Jewish with everything evil. So it doesn't matter today if it's an individual Jew or the community of Jews called Israel, or Zionism, that equation still has been made. Now, these myths don't sit on a table gathering dust. They don't hang into the atmosphere, just hanging there, but they're used to justify violence. So a year and a half ago, our synagogue here in Fredericton was attacked. The front panes of glass were shattered. And 6 months after that, there were bomb threats. So today, while Jews make up 1% of the population, we account for almost 19% of all hate crimes in Canada. That's ahead of every other group defined by ethnicity or race, religion, or those targeted because of sexual orientation. And all these myths have also something in common. There's a general misunderstanding of who Jews really are. And I'd like to take a little bit, my remaining time, just to share that with you, because I think throughout history, different civilizations have tried to put Jews in different boxes, race, religion, nationality, and none of these individual boxes have really fit us very well. So it's important for us to try to define who we are and where we come from. Most people think of us as just a religion, as solely a religion, but we're also a people. We're a people and a religion. It's called an ethno-religious group. We have a common language, a common history, a shared homeland, a common set of texts that inform our beliefs, and a common culture. We are indigenous people to the land of Israel. We have a 3,000-year-old history. We had our own country, a monarchy, a temple, laws, courts, religion, and culture. In Hebrew, this is called Am Yisrael, or the people of Israel. But Jews over successive civilizations have attempted to be colonized and to be assimilated, and were exiled. First by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, Crusaders, Ottomans, and finally the British. And after each of these waves of attempts to colonize us and assimilate us, we were expelled from our homeland. That's how Jews came to live around the world. But all the time we were exiled, there was a yearning by Jewish people to return to their homeland. This is essentially the heart of Zionism. I know I'm not referring to the political movement, which developed in the 1800s, but the historical yearning of Jews to return to their homeland. And this is reflected in a number of ways. Whenever we pray facing east toward Jerusalem. Our synagogues are situated facing east toward Israel. Many of the Jewish holidays are set around the agricultural seasons of Israel. And each year at the end of our Passover Seder or ceremony, we say, next year in Jerusalem. And in our Torah, many of the laws are only laws that can be developed and implemented in Israel. Then, in 1947, of course, there was a UN resolution which created the Jewish state of Israel. I just want to take my remaining time to talk about responses, Jewish responses to anti-Jewish hate. I think there's basically three, and in this I echo Tiger's statements as well. Education, education, education. Jews, in terms of our hierarchy of values, I think education would be near the top. In the first century, we were among the first to have a compulsory universal education system. This was way ahead of what happened in the UK or what was happening in the States. One of the features of a traditional Jewish education is debating, taking different sides of a question and arguing it. That's not how I was educated, but this is part of our culture. And this is not argument for the sake of winning. It's not argument to get your way or have power over the other person. This is argument to come closer to the truth. And so whenever I've tried to speak to different groups of people, to educate them, I've also tried to engage in this kind of conversation. And I'm really pleased to be here today to be able to do that, because I think that's partly how I orient in trying to engage with other people. So I look forward to your questions. I think I'm pretty much out of time here at the end.
And up next, we're going to have Lima.
Hello everyone, my name is Lima Samim, and I am a student majoring in political science and international relations at St. Thomas University. I am originally from Afghanistan and I came to Canada 3 years ago with a journey filled with hope, challenges, and growth. And today I want to talk about something deeply personal, racism, and why speaking up truly matters. As you know, I am from Afghanistan and I came from a country that women are not allowed to education. And my expectation of a country like Canada was really high about racism. And not long ago, at my workplace, where I was facing so many customers, someone just said to me, Afghans are good people, but their religion is not good. And another person told me, you don't need to wear hijab, you are safe in Canada now. Someone else said, you might look more beautiful without it, which means the hijab. And a man even joked, oh, I wear things like your hijab when I am cooking in the kitchen. At the first I was shocked, then I felt small, like I didn't belong. These were not just offhand comments, they were examples of racism and Islamophobia. Judgments made not because of who I am as a person, but because of what I believe and how I choose to express it. That moment taught me that racism is not always loud or violent. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it shows up in assumptions, in harmless jokes, or in so-called friendly advice. But no matter how it delivered, it carries the same message. You're not fully accepted here, and that's never okay. As a political science student, I have learned how racism operates not just through individuals, but through systems, in education, in workplace, in healthcare, in media. These systems can limit opportunities, silence voices, and make people feel invisible. It doesn't just hurt feelings, it shapes lives. But I believe that each of us has power, and one of the most powerful things we can do is speak up. And also, our words are so powerful. Even if we're not in someone's life forever, our words can stay in their hearts and minds forever, either as a wound or as a healing. That's why we have to speak with care in a world already full of judgment. and pain. Our words should never be what pushes someone closer to silence. My experience that shows like with customers, because I don't remember their faces. The only thing I remember what they said to me. And that's what matters, because words can stay with the pupil forever. And one of the most important things I have learned is this: just because we don't agree with someone's beliefs or how they live doesn't give us the right to judge them. We should respect, and respect means accepting the others, or accepting that others are different and still worthy. And that's how we can live in a diversity country like Canada. When we name racism, when we share our stories, when we stand beside each other, when we begin to challenge the silence, and that's where real change starts. Not just through laws or policies, but through awarenesses, empathy, and action. If you have experienced racism, I want you to know you are not alone. Your pain is real. Your stories matter. And if you have not, I encourage you to listen, not with guilt, but with compassion. Because change begins when we listen, reflect, and commit to doing better. I wear hijab with pride. No one forced me to wear it. It's my own choice, and it represents my religion, my identity, my strength, and my freedom. Choosing to be myself every single day in a world that sometimes tells me not to is a form of resistance. I believe in a future where no one has to choose between safety and identity, between belonging and being themselves. That's the world I want to help build, not just for myself, but for the next generation. So thank you for listening, for being here, and for standing up against racism in whatever form it takes. Because when we raise our voices together with care, with courage, and with respect, we can create a society where everyone is truly seen, valued, and free. And I also want to thank and appreciate MCA for organizing this kind of event that we can speak and share our stories to make awarenesses between people that they should not do with me or with anyone else this kind of jokes or comments that I am strong at that. Not everyone is strong, but that makes maybe makes someone to stay silent or even not take a step to outside. So please be careful with your words. Thank you so much.
So this is the community experience that I want to talk about. This is who we are. We are all here. And some of the experiences doesn't have to do with the black. Sometimes some of the experiences has to do with the fellow immigrants who are not indigenous in this society. So these are just some of the pictures of people we have gathered and few things myself and some other volunteers in the community has done in the land. And this is our current reality, who we are. Our uniqueness is our power. Our accent, our name. I was telling, was it Larry this afternoon, and I said my name is Alaba. He said it and was like, say it again. And I told him how to remember my name. And I said, remember Alabama? He said, yes, Alabama. So when you say Alaba, stop at ma, swallow the ma. So my name is Alaba, right? So this is who we are. Our name is unique. Our skin color, our food. And on the other side, which is our current reality, we have our past traumas. Fear of being dismissed when we speak up. Fear of being hidden and not seen. Fear of when we speak, we are not heard. Fear of stereotype, especially when it comes to crime sometimes. And sometimes we are not valued. Our contributions are not valued, which is why deliberately I started by telling us again who I am and the things I have done and the people around me, the people that volunteer with me, are currently doing in the community. I'll be talking about when it comes to racism, anti-racism. It affects us in so many ways in our social, political life, economic, but I just want to pick two areas: the youth, our school, and our career, our job. This resonates with me so much because it pertains to some of the things that I do. And in speaking about this, I will be mixing it up. I'll be talking about the challenges. I'll be talking about areas where we can have policy change. I'll be talking about how we can also respond. So I just have to mix it up so that I'm not just on one side of good, bad, or the ugly, but to see how we can all support. And the first example I have here is on allyship. Sometimes we need to step back and listen to our collectively, to listen to our voices and our concern when it comes to our youth. I have so many experiences, and unfortunately, this afternoon, I got a message from my daughter's teacher, which was not part of the things I want to say. But I'm going to use that recent as an example, recent experience. And I asked my daughter, they were on the corridor doing whatever program, and a teacher that is not the homeroom teacher, that is not the vice principal, had to send me a mail that my daughter was roaming about talking to somebody in grade 6, grade 8. And I asked my daughter, who are you talking to? He said it was a fellow black. She asked the question. And I saw those kind of comments where, and this is not the first time it happens to youth in our community, where a teacher just deliberately pick up on a child with very minimal comments that even as a parent, it doesn't just make sense. And these children, if there are, say there are disagreements in the school and they get to meet the teacher somehow dismiss the disagreement or the conversation because the child is black. Sometimes we close our eyes to these things, but it's happening too frequently. Not because these are sometimes an implicit bias, when the teacher just either doesn't understand what is going on and just choose to ignore. But if the same situation happens to an indigenous person, for instance, the teacher takes action. These youths may say that they are young, but they are saying it. And this kind of feedback we get on a daily basis. I hear it a lot. I hear it from my women. I hear it from the youth. These are just some of the examples of what we see. We need to walk the talk. Sometimes when we say we do training for our teachers on anti-racism, we need to ensure that this training are effective. And the question is, who is even conducting this training? The person conducting this training, does he have even an example? Does he have a first-hand example of when it comes to anti-racism so that he or she can better train or express or explain how the youth feels or how this needs to be addressed? Sometimes also we need to challenge stereotypes. Even as male, we have stereotypes as human beings, and to the female community as well. How much more if you are now a black and you are female or you are a young girl, there's so many stereotypes that is going on. And we also want to encourage and let us give space, give a safe space to our children. Our youth are crying. They seem to be throwing tantrum in school. They seem to be going into violence because they are not happy. The presence of a police supposed to explain or supposed to give us an impression of safety, but it gives us another impression. Either the presence looks at us, the black, as if we are targeted. Like, I have some examples of during, was it last year or this year, when there was some gun raid or gun suspicion at Fredericton High School. And there was a second instance when a child, a black boy, was among other friends, and this boy wore a neck chain that has gun symbol, and another boy just said, oh, is that gun symbol or something? And somebody reported, and the first person the police came to raid to ask question was the black boy that was in the group. It wasn't the black boy that asked the question. It wasn't the black boy that was wearing the gun chain. And the first question was to the black boy. So when it comes to safety, our youth are somehow afraid. So we need to readdress this form of racism. They are subtle, but it needs to be looked into. And I would also like to mention something around expectations and our ask when it comes to the youth. The curriculum should be reviewed to include all the children. It's not deliberate that when this curriculum were done years back, because of the population of the, at that point in time, because of the demography of the youth we have, some content were not included. But as we have seen in the past years, we've had influx of blacks, we've had influx of people from different communities. Then it's time we review the curriculum. And when this curriculum is being reviewed, the question is, who were the people that are called to the table to come and review it? Are we having the representation from the community for whose sake we want to review the curriculum? For instance, when it comes to celebrating events and festivals and culture, and in teachings and even in mentioning it in school, are we very intentional? And another example I will talk about is our teachers. If we can have more diverse and inclusive teachers, so that we can have the marginalized and racial educators at all levels. Sometimes we have them at the very low level where they are not involved in policy changes or in policy making. We need to be very intentional so that we can ensure that we include all this in our change of curriculum. I'm trying to push down because of time. And I will talk about our job as adults. The question is, so many of us came with a lot of experience from where we are coming from, and we have this expectation that if we school here, we will have Canadian knowledge, then we do work where we are schooling, then we will have gathered Canadian experience to work. But the reality is that we go for interviews, we don't get feedback. And sometimes in the course of the interview, maybe because of our accent, the interviewer may not understand what we are saying, but what we see is that we just see the panelists nodding as if they understand, but they don't understand. So at this stage, either we need to have representation at the interview panel so that we can also hire the best, than ignoring all our experiences that we are bringing to the table because the panelists at the interview do not understand what we are saying. Peradventure, you and I finally employed. The question is that, are you supported when it comes to career progression? When they want to make room at the top, are we making room for the blacks? Are we making room for the immigrants to climb up the ladder? We need to be intentional when it comes to hiring. We need to be intentional when it comes to career. We need to be heard and supported. We need to be promoted. So many times, once you get to a particular role, it looks like you have hit your ceiling. There's a ceiling cap on that role as a black person, and you do like 2 times, you do double, you do a lot to be seen, to be heard, but you are not being heard. You have this feeling of mistrust, and which really affects our mental health. Also, one thing I would also like to mention is when it comes to inclusion and diversity programs, we have seen this being done over and over and over in organizations. We have committees that sit to try to work on inclusion and diversity, but what we have seen so far has been, we've not been walking the talk. A colleague mentioned to me that she had an issue eating in the office because when she brings her food, when she takes her food to the office, they said her food is scented. When she doesn't even use any spray, they said her body is scented. At a point, she stopped taking her bath in the morning so that she doesn't feel centered at the place of work. And at a particular time, she either worked from home or took time off, and somebody still wrote and said, oh, this lady, her office was centered, that they passed by her office, and it was on a day when she was not in the office. So sometimes these things are still there. We have to keep to ourselves, we keep our food, we keep everything around us so that it doesn't look like we are violating the culture. The question here, for instance, is that, yes, I agree, our office may be not-centered office. What if we have a room that is centered so that people that have centered food can go there and eat the food? So it's just to give an example of how sometimes our inclusion and diversity programs does not get to the root of what we want to solve. And for our future generation, for as many people that are here that is having this feeling of not being heard, I want to encourage you that you are not alone. Don't be silent, be resilient, and be bold. Be resilient and be bold. Don't try to fill in the space. Make sure you belong, which is an example of when we started the Young Leaders Mentorship Program. We were doing it exclusively. At a point I felt, well, we just have to bring it out there. We just don't want to be by ourselves. We want to be out there, and we've been able to gather momentum and have different nationalities join us. So don't try to fill in space. Make sure you belong. Don't shrink into spaces.
I've been in Canada for almost 4 years now, and yeah, I'm just here to give a sneak peek on that. Just a quick reminder, my name is Arnab Taranga, and I'm in my 4th year of a Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology and Criminology at the University of New Brunswick. But yeah, let's get started. Before coming to Canada, I definitely did not experience racism. I experienced discrimination in everything else, but racism was a very new concept in terms of experiencing. I heard about it, I knew about it. A lot of the times I was ignorant about it, but then experiencing was interesting. I'll just tell you the quick story. I landed in Canada in January 2nd, 2022. I landed in Ottawa. I have family there. Around the same time, there was something interesting going on in Ottawa, the trucker convoy. And I was living in downtown at the time, so I was like right at the center of it. So the first week I was at home, didn't go out. So in the second week, I went out, I think, to go somewhere. And as I was walking to the bus station, there were just people parked with their trucks on the side, and the sidewalks were kind of blocked off. They were all on like tents and camping chairs, and they were having a good time, sure. As I was walking to the bus stop, somebody yelled. Again, most of these folks, they don't yell in front of you, they yell from the back, they yell from the side. So somebody yelled, "Go back to India." Now, first of all, wrong country. Second of all, buy me a ticket, sure. But that was the first time where I experienced hate in a way where this person didn't know me, didn't ever meet me or even talk to me, didn't even face me, but had this idea that I didn't belong there, so I needed to go back. That kind of stuck with me until I got to the bus stop, and there were a bunch of other folks there, and somebody, and I was wearing a mask, obviously, it's COVID, but somebody yelled at me, "Take off that mask and show us your face." And I looked, and there was 3 people, and 2 of them were just, they were drinking coffee and obviously protesting, and another person with him was a police person. And they were all like hanging out like buddies, and this person yelled at me, and the police was right there. And I looked at the police, I was like, "Are you gonna do," like in my mind, like giving a look like, "Are you gonna do something about this?" And the guy just shrugged, and I just tried to ignore that and move on, because that's what, as the immigrant idea is that just move on. There's no point in fighting this. There's no point in going up against it, because there's always more of them than us. But yeah, that's just one story. And And then I moved to Fredericton. I came to school, and there was this other experience that I'd like to share here. This experience happened in class. So I took a class, and there was this like group project, so where you were paired up in partners, and you'd have to write like this one essay, not a big essay, but a small essay, and submit it as a group. So 2 people would research on it, and it's a very beginner's level, so it's easy. So me and my group mate, they are white Canadian. So we work on it, we submit it, but however, we both had to submit the same thing, but from like our own account, so the professor could grade us separately. A week later, we got our grades back, a week or 2 later, and turned out my partner got an A minus, and I got a B minus, a whole bump down. I was like, we literally submitted the same thing. Did I do something wrong? So I went up to the prof and asked them, like, in the class, like after a class, I asked them, like, hey, I think there might be something wrong, because we are the same group. And they told me that like they could see like some parts of the essays were not properly written. There were like issues with grammar and stuff. So there might be issues. So I should rather go to the writing center to get help. Now, for me, this was like, but you didn't ask us like who wrote which part. You just assumed and just gave us the grade. So I kind of protested. I wrote an email to them with like CCing the dean of faculty, and then I didn't get a response to the email. I just got my grade changed from B minus to A minus. And now like again, this is my first semester there, so I chose not to do anything about it at the time, so I just moved on. Up until I told a few folks. But anyways, I'll get back to that in a bit. But yeah, these 2 were just like 2 small experiences that I have faced in Canada. But it would be really wrong of me to just talk about these and not talk about all the countless other good experiences I've had in Canada. Because that's the thing that you realize, that once you've been here long enough, that the folks who are discriminating, the folks who are being racist, are a very, very small number of people just being more loud and just being more out there. So that's been my experience in Canada. But at the same time, I'm an international student, so there are some other experiences as well. So experiences such as when renting houses, there's always issues because there's always prejudice about renting to people of color. And that's not just to international students, it's also to indigenous students as well, that renting to people of color is, a lot of the time, landlords just don't tend to do that. I was told once when I sent on a marketplace, I sent a message to somebody, and they told me I can get the house as long as I'm not cooking ethnic food. And I was like, a little bit of seasoning never hurt anybody. So I didn't want to rent from them, but yeah, so that was like one incident. Again, a very small incident in terms of like all the other places I've tried to rent. But there's stuff like that. There's prejudice about international students coming here and taking up housing. And again, I wish. we constantly have to struggle with finding housing, affordable housing, so we are not taking up housing. There's stereotypes about international students coming here and taking up jobs. Also, I wish, but no, we do not take up jobs, but there are all those stereotypes. And a lot of the times, all these hate-filled stereotypes are pushed on either by people on the internet, so either bots or anonymous folks posting from probably somewhere out there from a town full of like 300 people. Never met a people of color, but first in line to push those stereotypes out. But that's where I kind of learned that fighting or like going up against these folks is not something that I can do individually. Like, it's not something I can go up, because if somebody chooses to be prejudiced against you, if somebody chooses to be biased against you, to be racist, they will find a reason. You could be the perfect model citizen and they would still find a reason. You could be the perfect person and they would be like, oh, you're breathing wrong. And that could be the reason. So the best way to do it, and again, as folks have mentioned, education, 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 because that's where the core issue is. And the same thing goes for policy as well. When the housing minister comes up and tells the issue that Canada is facing a housing crisis is because we've had a lot of international students, and does not take responsibility about who let these international students in without ensuring adequate housing. That's where the issue lies, that we're taking a group of already minoritized people and victimizing them, and the government is sponsoring that. So stuff like that needs to be changed. The policy aspect of it, of education and fixing those education ideas and just going through the curriculum and trying to make it more inclusive is something that we can do. And I'm pretty sure we have been doing that. And initially when I was facing all these issues, it got to me initially. It did, because that's always something that keeps you up at night, because there's this person out there who just hates you for no reason, and there's nothing you could do to fix it. And there's that dehumanizing aspect as well, that to hate you, you need to be dehumanized, and then it's easier to hate you. So there's always that, and that did keep me up at night from time to time. Until I actually started going outside more, socializing more, and meeting up people more, in both professionally, academically, personally, in all aspects, and realizing that most folks are against stuff like this. Not just they don't do it, they're very much against it. So that gives me hope, that gave me hope, and that made me believe. And same thing went when I was volunteering with different clubs and societies and meeting folks who are also my age, and learning that, yes, the next generation does not believe in that. There are first generation immigrants, there are also first generation folks who are experiencing this change as well, and some of them can't cope with this change and can't transition to this change. So that's where the hate comes from. That's because they can't accept this change in their lifestyle. So that's where I feel like the newer generations and the younger generations are going to be much, much, much more different, and that's where I see a ray of hope, and I like to be pessimistic about it. And that's how I resist, that's how I respond. But yeah, that was my quick story. Thank you very much to MCAF, and thank you folks for joining.
I came here back in 2011 with my family as an immigrant. We are from Vietnam originally, and I went to New Zealand before for my high school and whatnot, and that's when I learned about racism. Of course, like I think some of you have mentioned here, before you came to Canada, you didn't really know what racism looks like. You've heard about it, but you didn't really experience it. And that was what I've experienced as well before I came to New Zealand and then to Canada. I think to Canada it was a lot harder in some ways, because I also had to learn to be the oldest sister in the family, to be the third parent in a family, and usually that is the case for a lot of immigrant folks who come here with young children and their parents don't speak English and whatnot. And so I think that there were some parts of me who were trying to protect my family from that, because I knew that my parents would experience some microaggression at some point. Both of my siblings who went to school would experience that at some point as well, and they might not know that it was racism. But of course I couldn't protect them from that. So I wish that we had more panels like that before when I first came, so that I could actually learn about everyone else's lived experiences. I think this is very helpful, and I think that to find that relatability is so important, especially you don't know that how many people out there are also experiencing the same thing as you do. And so I really appreciate everyone's experiences today. So we do take questions from audiences. Oh yes, we already have someone who raised their hand, so great.
I have a question for Mr. Finkelman, Larry. What has to happen in Canada for Jews to feel safe?
I was envying Arnab's optimism in terms of the people who he experiences as a minority being racist. I think it's become harder for me in the last few years to become more and more optimistic in terms of a path forward, in terms of what we might do to make Canada safer for Jews. I think last week or so, the man in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, was arrested for advocating genocide and for inciting hatred. Jewish synagogues have been firebombed. Jewish schools have been shot. Jewish businesses have been vandalized. Members of our own community here go into a bank and get yelled at for being Jewish. Another went to the superstore and was buying a product from Israel and had all their groceries thrown across the belt. And it goes on. And Jewish teachers in schools in New Brunswick are thinking of leaving their jobs because of harassment, and Jewish students are thinking of switching schools. So I wish I could see a path clearly, have optimism. I'm committed to education. But I think by and large, my experience is that the government, the federal government, has not taken this seriously. In the last 4 years, since 2020, the incidence of anti-Semitism has increased 172%. And I think the federal government could do more. But as well, I'm not necessarily optimistic of this will change for the better in the short term. I think it'll be a while.
Larry, I just want to follow up on some of the comments that you've said. It's clear if we look around, education alone doesn't work. We're losing. How much education against anti-Semitism has there been over the decades? Tons. Anti-Semitism is exploding exponentially, and it's coming also from educational institutions. You just touched on something just as you finished, but in my experience, consequences change behavior, not education. If you think just education is going to do it, you're telling yourself a nice bedtime story so you can sleep well at night, thinking you've done something wonderful for the world. You wasted your bloody time. There needs to be strictly enforced criminal laws against anyone who participates in hate speech against an individual, against a group, against a country. Organizations who support individuals who make hate speech, be they employers, universities, government, they should also be criminally responsible for it. Unless there are consequences to racist behavior, anti-Semitism, or anything else, without consequences, nothing's going to change. Look on TV. You pointed out yourself, it persists because governments, police, just not doing anything. I think that's what we need to do, argue for more, not just more involvement by the governments, but enforcement. If there are laws against hate speech, they ought to be enforced strictly. And I'll finish my little speech. Thank you.
Has bombed hospitals, has bombed schools, has bombed tents, has bombed aid workers, has blocked aid, has committed multiple war crimes, killed journalists, killed healthcare workers, killed more than 60,000 people, almost half of them are women and children. is that state exempt from criticism? So if a state has bombed hospitals, schools, tents, aid workers, killed journalists, killed healthcare workers, killed women, killed children, killed tens of thousands of people, most of them civilians, is that state exempt from criticism?
I think yes, because every life matters, and we have to. We don't have any right to kill children, women, and innocent people in all around the world. So I agree that yes, the state is doing kind of like racism biases. But yeah, thank you.
I guess I would distinguish between two types of criticism. I think every state, including Canada, can be criticized legitimately for their policies, for their actions, for the words of their politicians, and for their laws and actions. This is the way we would, in Canada, we criticize, we just went through an election cycle, and it was fair game. All the parties were criticizing the other parties and the leaders in the proposed programs. To me, that is legitimate criticism. And I think every state, without exception, can be a subject of that kind of criticism. But there's also a second kind of criticism that attempts to create a double standard, to criticize one country differently than another, or that tries to delegitimize one country's existence, or that tries to deny one country's ability to exist. And I think that crosses the line for me, because when you think of all the countries in the world that can be criticized, most criticism is against their policies and programs, their actions, but not to say they shouldn't exist. And that's where I would separate the two.
But I know that presently there are municipalities across Canada who are creating bubble spaces for minority groups. And that's something maybe the City of Fredericton, with the MCAF input, might take a look at in terms of creating safe spaces for whether it be schools or whether it be adults in terms of minority groups. But I do have a question for Mr. Finkelman. In recent years, where has anti-Semitism come from on the political spectrum, from the left or from the right, considering that the Jewish community nationwide is about 1% of the total population, yet it leads in the number of reception of hate crimes towards it?
Certainly 15 to 20 years ago, I think anti-Jewish hate was largely from the right. Neo-Nazis, Holocaust denial. I remember in the 90s, swastika was put on the synagogue here in Fredericton. And you still see that today. Teachers tell me, students carve swastikas into desks, put it on papers, give the Hitler salute. In Riverview, a couple summers ago, swastikas were put on a city park. This kind of stems from the white supremacist extreme right. But I think in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, maybe, there's been a steady growth of anti-Semitism on the left. And I think this is partly because of an ideology that was adopted on the left that provides a permission structure for anti-Semitism. and this is my view, and certainly when I think of, left-leaning politics today, there's often a very fixed categories of people who are oppressed and who are oppressors, people who are privileged and people who are victims. And it's been a quandary about where Jews get placed in that kind of system. Jews, people who are white, are oppressors, people of color are not, are victims, or are being oppressed. So the difficulty is, where do Jews fit in that? And typically on the left, Jews are placed in the oppressor category and are seen as white and privileged. The problem with that is it doesn't fit the experience of Jews around the world. Before 1960, Jews were not white enough. We were excluded from golf clubs, curling rinks, neighborhoods, occupations. This is in Fredericton, in Canada. More recently, Jews are too white. We are being excluded from progressive projects on the left. And so, to me, this is one of the problems that we're facing today, is when that kind of worldview is adopted, and I think it's applicable in some situations, but in others I think there's a problem, because then it means that Jewish experience of persecution is minimized, and sometimes there's persecution coming from people who are oppressed, and that gets overlooked as well.
For the past 10 years, I've heard, and even read about the fact that parents are asking for equity in educational policy so that the underrepresented people can be seen. Now, the fight for anti-racism and this equity that we're talking about is not an individual thing. It has to be collective. So what do you think we can do as a community, as people, collectively, to shift the minds of policymakers, right? To reflect those changes that we have been craving for years now, to make sure that some of our kids, are seen in the policies. Because when you pick up the educational policy, you read through these policies, you might not see yourself in the policy. And I agree that these policies were made several years ago when they didn't expect the kind of shift that we're having in Canada today. So how do we, come to a common ground where we can influence the, is it influence? Yeah. Influence the decision makers?
I would say from when I was working with the Post-Secondary Education for Training and Labor Department, there was this consensus that the training modules don't work that well because most of the time they're not enforced or they're not mandatory, they're more like optional. So it's usually like when they do host like training sessions and everything, it's always like the same 10, 15, 20 people who show up, and then most people don't. And also that the change needs to come from the top and it doesn't need to be a push from the bottom, because people have been, from the bottom side, people have been asking for decades. But that's the thing that's like, we need to tell our legislators, we need to let our lawmakers know that what we want to see in our policies. It shouldn't come from the bottom where somebody actually writes a policy proposal and sends it upwards, because usually it tends to get lost or pushed back, because let's be honest, it's usually a tricky topic and it doesn't get votes. So most of the times people just tend to push it back or keep it something as like a footnote in some other laws or other policies and not a policy on its own, because it's easy to make news about it and it's easy to blow it out of proportions. That's what it comes anytime anybody talks about nowadays about diversity, equity, inclusion, and all that. So that that's what happens when it comes from there. But at the same time, I do know I have worked with the UNB Student Union, and I know like all the other student unions and student organizations are trying their best to push these type of policies in provincial policies and federal policies as well, to include more diverse ideas and more diverse content in education and also in just general policy practices as well. And I know that even the government is trying that as well. It's just that the change needs to come from the top. That's what I've seen, and that's what I firmly believe, that change needs to come from the top. Our leaders need to understand what we need as what the people are asking for. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
While I agree with him on policy change should come from the top, I'm going to give some examples of some of the things I've done and what we can do. So when I came to Canada, less than 3 years ago, I came with 4 children, 4 youths, and I was looking for activity for them that will align with the kind of developments I've given them over the years. I couldn't see around, and I went to Fredericton, New Brunswick website, and I researched every page. Having done that, I saw an advertisement on the website on LinkedIn where they wanted to recruit some youth representative council to join the youth board. I guess this is where Hillary sits now. And I encouraged about 10 of my youths to do the application. Their parents supported them. 3 of my own children also applied, and 3 youths, Black Nigerians, were eventually admitted into the Youth Representative Council of Fredericton. I mean, that is a good direction, and these youths told me that they recommended, for instance, places where there's supposed to be bus stop, where there were none, based on where they live, and it was implemented. I'm giving the example because we had some representation at the table, youth council, they were listened to, and it was done. That is what I know on youth side. But on general policy making, for adults, we need to do more of such. Sometimes, either we don't see the advertisement, maybe it's out there and it's not on our faces, or we need to be more deliberate to say that we are inviting people of color to a particular table, or Black. We need to be deliberate, and because in the past, maybe people have tried to, and they were not accepted for whatever reason. So maybe that's the reason why we don't have diversity among the policy makers. But we need to be more intentional to invite specific, either reaching out to HEMCA, for instance, reaching out to different groups where to say, can you give us a representative from the Afghanistan community to sit on this table? Then we are being intentional. So with that, we'll be able to have more diverse voices on the table. So 2 things. 1, being intentional to call us to the table. And on youth matters, I would say that currently I sit in the planning table committee for youth crime prevention. That is just one side. Yes, youth crime prevention, I'm on that table, but there are so many other tables for youth. There's still some other tables that I'm not aware of. I'm looking for them. If you find it, please let me know. So the point here is that we need to be called. Some of us are interested. We want to be on that table. So call us in. Let's have the representation. I believe with that, we'll have some changes.
I'm trying not to get emotional. It's a lot to hear. It's a lot to reflect on. It's all over. Being an immigrant and Canadian recently, a person with color, raising 2 different type of generations. My kids are actually half of them not Canadian, the other half Canadian. It's not being able to represent myself within my family as who I am, because it's sometimes confusing to my children. One thing that I'm trying to understand, and one thing actually I'm trying to comprehend, do we have the right audience to what we're trying to achieve? Are we sending the message, education, 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 education as an awareness, education as an protocol, education as a learning modules, education about culture, education about respect, what type of education that we're looking for and what type of audience that we want to reach. Something like this attracts the right audience to support, but it's the right audience to impact, is to enforce, because I don't think, I don't know, I'm not talking about like everybody else, but like, is there anybody here who offended somebody, who committed racism, or tried to downsize someone? Anyone? So we need the right audience to make an impact. We all here support you, support us. When my child doesn't want to respect her culture, which is my culture, just because she's Canadian and she's being in a Canadian culture, it hurts me. When she doesn't eat the food that I cook, it hurts me. When she prefers McDonald's rather than chicken kebab, it hurts me. When my husband, who's Canadian, tells me that I don't communicate properly just because I have English is my second language. Well, bilingual who speaks of French and English get like, woohoo, you guys are okay or perfect. But I speak Arabic and English as well. These are like, I consider bilingual as well. And if I want to learn French, trust me, give me a year. I'm not being optimistic, not 2 months, a year. Just give me a year and I'll speak French. But I believe that we need the right audience to make an impact. Sometimes family gets so very, very frustrated defending themselves, and for that reason our children going to school maybe not doing the right action when they want to defend themselves, when somebody bully them. Because racism is part of bullying. And as, sorry, I forgot your name, Arnav, as Arnav says, even if you're perfect, they would say you're not breathing properly. So finding a way that somebody, so what we're facing right now is someone who has how to say that? Yeah, English is my second language. Like self-esteem, exactly. When they do have that low self-esteem, and try to just like bully someone. It doesn't have to be a minority who gets bullied. I consider, like, if I've seen a lot of people, white people, Canadian, lived here for generations, get racist because they're poor. They don't dress in a certain way. They don't look in a certain way. So I believe that education is something important, that it has to reach all the society component, whether it is the policymakers, whether the family itself, whether children, like being together. The environment is important to create that safe space to find where we belong. Canadian as a multicultural country that doesn't have that multicultural structure except some activities that it happens within the multicultural center, and that's it. Nobody knows about everybody as it's supposed to be. in literacy at school, they teach it just because it's a subject that it needs to be taught. It's not about life or style of life that we want to live. So I believe in order to make an action, we have to find the right audience in order to make the impact. Thank you so much.
You mentioned that Israel was created by the UN in 1947. But why do you ignore the same UN that has sanctioned Israel and found evidence of genocide against the Palestinian people? Would you like me to repeat the second one as well? Okay. How do you explain settler violence and the displacement of the Palestinian people from their own indigenous land? Is it not racism from Israel to ethnically cleanse a whole nation and completely erase their history?
Perhaps I could address your second question first about settler violence and displacement of Palestinian people from their own land. I think when Israel was created in 1947, in its Declaration of Independence, it offered full and equal citizenship to all people living within what would be the state of Israel. There were 150,000, at that time they called themselves Arabs, who accepted and stayed in Israel. The rest left. I think there were some incidents of displacement, no question. But the vast majority left because the infrastructure that was supporting the Arab population crumbled, and because all the Arab states surrounding Israel declared war. And they left, they weren't displaced from their land, and I don't think there was ethnic cleansing. If you want to talk ethnic cleansing, you could talk about...
Answer the question.
I am answering the question.
Shut your mouth. Yeah, shut your mouth, you ignorant.
I think everyone has to be respectful of each other, please. I know that everyone has different experiences and opinions, but I would appreciate if nobody used harsh languages here.
Yes, I think there's different historical narratives here, and they're both maybe legitimate. I'm giving you my perception, which is what I was asked.
She asked you about the UN declaring a current genocide in the country you're trying.
And I said I would answer the second question first, which is on settler violence, which is what I've been doing. If you be patient, I'll get to the first question. So, in terms of the ethnic cleansing part of what she said, I don't think that took place. And if you want to talk ethnic cleansing, you think of almost 1 million Jews in Arab lands who were kicked off their lands and pushed out following the State of Israel's declaration. Now the first, just let me finish your question. I'm going to the first question now. If you ask 2 questions, you get 2 answers. The second question was about ignoring the UN sanction for genocide. I think what's happened to the Palestinian people is a tragedy. And I think Hamas needs to be held accountable. I think they have systematically taken aid and used it to fortify tunnels and to sell aid to Palestinians to finance their armies. They've launched missiles from mosques, from hospitals, from schools. They've used those as bases of operations. And to me, the genocide is attempted on Israelis, not on Palestinians. If you look at the definition of genocide, which is what you asked, it requires intent to wipe out a group. I don't think Israel has actually had that intent, and I think the intent's all on the Hamas side. Those are your 2 questions.
Excuse me, the question was, the UN declared genocide activities happening, do you dismiss those or not?
Yeah, I disagree with it because of their definition
And that
of genocide.
same UN that you claimed founded your country, you're going to disagree with. It's okay when it's with you, but it's not okay when it's against you.
No, I think the UN also established a Palestinian state. When they established the state of Israel, they had a two-state. They had a two-state solution, and they did that.
Allowed to go to Palestine.
Believe me, sometimes some of these disagreements that we have is because we fail to understand the factor that culture brings into some of these things that we are experiencing. We all come from different backgrounds, different culture, different perspective, different education, and we are the starting point of everything that we are talking about, we are thinking. So we need to learn to challenge ourselves and also embrace what we are seeing, and that is what we are trying to do. And we have programs, to help these things come to light. So if you, your children, your organization, the school that your children are in, are interested to have some of these things, feel free to reach out to us, right? We are very listening, we communicate very well, we help kids, get one understanding of things that they need to learn, and also for adults. Also, I want to mention that if we want to see the change that we are all talking about, each and every one of us here need to start taking action, right? We don't have to, speak behind the table, and it's not all about calling people out. Sometimes we call ourselves in a very polite manner so we can reach a common understanding, right? So we need to, do it in a fair, equitable environment, in a fair, equitable manner, so everyone can be heard, right? And we get to a common understanding and a solution.
I think community support is something that I really want to emphasize on today as well. That having the right community, having the community that is able to support you to learn and to grow, I think that is also very important, and I want to stress on that today. I really thank everyone for being patient. I really hope that moving forward, by being in this space, we need to be patient with each other. We need to be respectful of each other. Everyone has such different lived experiences. Even though, I'm a person of color, but I cannot speak for other people of color experiences or Black people, Indigenous people experiences. And so I would like to thank everyone for being patient, and I know that sometimes it's so uncomfortable to being in this space, and that's why a lot of people try to avoid it, especially people who don't have to live through these experiences, right? And I really thank everyone for bringing up, all very important topics and issues today. Please feel free to reach out to the panelists afterward too, and feel free to reach out to me as well. You do have the contact information, I believe, of the panelists. And so if you want to continue any sort of conversation and discussions moving forward, I really encourage you to do so. Thank you so much.